year that the great sickness ravaged King's Landing and the small council fell into disarray, the faith militant rose to a power not seen in centuries. Rumors spread through the alleyways of Flea Bottom and the lavish corridors of the Red Keep alike. The High Septon had grown tired of the crown's decadence, and the people, hungry, frightened, and pressed beneath ceaseless wars, looked to the Seven in desperation. No longer content to be a figure cloaked in ceremony alone, the High Septon gathered the warriors of the faith. And when men with stars upon their foreheads began patrolling the city, displacing the gold cloaks, few knew what the end would be. Not even the lords who still clutched their half-empty coffers foresaw that the faith would do the unthinkable, set a new crown upon the High Septon's brow, and proclaim him king. The High Septon who rose to claim the throne was not the cautious, polite, half-petitioned prelate that courtiers had come to expect in years past. He had ascended to the most devout, not through coin or nepotism, but through a relentless call to piety and austerity. Tall, with a gaunt face and deep-set eyes, he spoke in a calm voice that often carried over the chaos of a crowd without him needing to shout. Those who had once mocked him for his simplicity now bowed their heads when he passed. He was known to the people as Osmond the Devout, though in tavern whispers he was the stranger reborn, a man who would end a kingdom's sinful ways. The day came when Osmond the Devout strode from the great sept of Baylor, flanked by his faith militant. Outside, the grand plaza teemed with the poorest of King's Landing. Ragged women, children covered in grime, crippled old men. They all gathered around the marble steps, drawn by stories of the High Septon's healing presence. They yearned for bread, for a crumb of hope, and his homilies had soothed their hearts where the crown's edicts had failed. When he raised his arms to the sky, the riot of voices stilled. "Brothers and sisters," he said, "for too long we have been deceived by false leaders who promised prosperity and gave us famine, who declared war for their own ambitions and fed our sons to ravens. The Seven watch over us, and the time has come for the faith to guide the realm back to righteousness. Will you stand with me?" Many. The roar of the crowd was thunderous. Many of them dropped to their knees, tears carving paths through the grime on their cheeks, while others shouted the High Septon's name in frantic adoration. Confronted with this sea of devotion, the gold cloaks stationed near the plaza dared not raise their swords. Their commander, a knight more inclined to accept bribes than uphold discipline, simply let the moment unfold. In truth, he'd been paid enough to turn a blind eye by the faith militant, or else coerced with the threat of excommunication, which in those days carried a sharp finality, no small matter, considering the legions of fervent small folk who might descend on any man branded as an enemy of the church. That afternoon, in a ceremony none had seen before, the High Septon was crowned on the steps of the great Septon. The coronation was short, with no lavish feasts or extravagant garb. Instead, as the bells tolled from every sept in King's Landing, Osmond the Devout was anointed with holy oils and crowned with a simple, gilded circlet, ringed by images of the seven-pointed star. The people wept and reached for him. The faith militant stood guard, shining in plate painted with the seven-pointed star on each breast, and a hush of awe fell as, in a single voice, thousands chanted his name. Osmond the Devout, once High Septon, was now king. And in that moment, the centuries-old line of monarchs who had claimed the Iron Throne found themselves cast aside by a throng of desperate faithful. Word spread like wildfire. The Seven had chosen a new champion. The name of the Targaryens, the Baratheons, and all the other great houses who had once claimed the seat meant little compared to the promise of bread, mercy, and righteous rule. Yet behind the jubilation, anxiety gnawed at the hearts of the realm's lords. Could a High Septon truly rule without the support of the great houses? Would the realm endure, or plunge into another war? On the night after his coronation, Osmond held a council in the great sept, rather than in the Red Keep. Several priests, the most fervent among the devout, were given new positions, replacements for the small council, though their official titles were not so finely delineated. Instead of a master of coin, Osmond named a confessor of tithes, a stern-faced Septon who oversaw the collecting of offerings throughout the realm. Where once sat a master of laws, a gray-haired Septon with a scholar's bent was appointed to interpret the seven-pointed star and shape the realm's new edicts. In a corner of the council chamber knelt Sir Brian of the Faith Militant, a reputed knight who had abandoned his fealty to a lesser lord to fight beneath the starry banners. He had a face scarred by years of war and a steady, quiet voice. Rumor had it that he had left his liege after discovering a plot to murder peasants, suspected of harboring a rival. When his lord forced him to comply, Sir Brian refused. The two men fought, and Sir Brian vanished into the night with a price on his head. Now he knelt in service of Osmond, who had personally cleansed him of those old stains on his soul. When Osmond spoke, his voice echoed in the vastness of the sept. Sir Brian, this new kingdom we have birthed will face many foes. There will be kings in the west, or in the north, or across the sea, who will laugh at our claim. The seven do not laugh. They see, and it is our duty to be their hands on earth. Rise, Sir Brian, as the holy protector of the faith. You will ride at the head of our armies to defend our cause where words cannot. The knight looked up, startled by the new title. He rose to his feet slowly. Your Grace, he said, the old form still on his tongue. I shall keep the realm safe, in the Seven's name. Osmond's calm smile revealed neither pride nor warmth. The realm is made of men, he said, and men must be led. If we fail, we become hypocrites. If we succeed, we fulfill the Seven's will. That same night, the bells of the septs rang, and the small folk danced in the streets by torchlight. The Red Keep, overshadowed and unoccupied by a legitimate royal presence, no king, nor any recognized heir of the old line, remained eerily quiet. The gold cloak stationed there seemed uncertain as to whom they reported. The Faith Militant patrolled the streets with controlled vigilance, ensuring no riots broke out. Throughout King's Landing, a strange hush of anticipation settled. In the days that followed, ravens flew to every corner of the realm. Their messages were simple. The faith has taken the throne. The crown is worn by King Osmond the Devout, chosen by the Seven. He calls upon all lords to swear fealty and uphold the faith's laws, or face condemnation as heretics. Some who read these messages in far-off keeps laughed. Others trembled, for rumors of the Faith Militant's numbers had grown. And then came the stories of how even the small folk gave them shelter, forming an unbreakable chain of eyes and ears. In the Vale of Arran, Lord Donal Arran had come of age in a time of strife. He was a pious young man, but his father and uncles had taught him that politics was warfare by other means. When he received the raven, he summoned his advisers to the Erie's High Hall. The cold wind rattled the moon door as he and his bannermen debated their response. A few lesser lords asked if perhaps they should kneel and swear to King Osmond. After all, the Vale was still rebuilding from the War of the Five Kings, and they could ill afford more bloodshed. Lord Donal shook his head. I am loyal to the Seven, and the Vale has never been a land of heretics. Yet to place the faith above all noble lines is not so simple a matter. My father once told me, if the faith is allowed to hold both the sword and the scepter, who is left to check them when their righteousness dims? None? One of his bannermen, a gaunt man with a hawkish nose, replied, Better to face a righteous man on the throne than a tyrant enthroned by war. But another, older lord, rose to speak. What if the high Septon's zeal blinds him? We have all seen how a man who thinks himself the embodiment of the Seven can commit any deed, justified by piety. And so the Vale withheld its immediate fealty, waiting to see what the other great houses would do. In the meantime, hidden entreaties went out to the north, to the Reach, to Dorne, sounding out potential alliances. None wished to instigate another disastrous war, save perhaps for the Iron Islands, where talk of sowing chaos often stirred, for chaos provided reaving and glory to those who worshipped the drowned god. In King's Landing, King Osmond's first days on the throne were spent in rigorous reforms. New laws demanded that septs throughout the realm must open their doors to the poor. The confessor of tithes traveled to major cities, collecting a portion of the wealth from local septons and from pious lords to fill the battered royal treasury. Yet Osmond forbade lavish feasts and ended the distribution of official gifts to lords who visited the capital, thereby saving coin. What the small folk saw was frugality, charity, and a church that seemed to take its role as caretaker seriously. But a creeping tension seized the hearts of some within the city. King Osmond's men took a stern approach to what they deemed impiety. Taverns were shuttered earlier, whorehouses forced to pay higher taxes or close altogether. The cost of sinful indulgence became steep, and those who had grown accustomed to the city's vices fumed in back alleys, cursing the new king in hushed voices. Yet the small folk who had nothing to lose found their bellies fuller than before. Bread was handed out in the great sept twice a day, and the stew kitchens funded by the tithes fed the poor. For now, it seemed a miracle. King Osmond delivered on his promise to protect the lowest among them. Still, not all was well. Whispers began spreading that certain shady elements of the city had taken it upon themselves to sabotage the faith's efforts, protesting the closure of gambling dens and the crippling tax on carnal houses. Men in black cloaks scrawled messages on walls in the dead of night. "Beware the White Crow," referencing an old rumor that a certain sect within the faith worshipped not the seven, but some twisted version of them. True or not, such rumors gnawed at the fragile trust among the populace. Within the halls of the Red Keep, where eventually King Osmond chose to reside, if only to keep better control of the symbol of royal power, he found the Iron Throne to be less a seat of glory and more a precarious perch. Maesters had said for generations that kings who ruled from the Iron Throne must have both swords and banners behind them. Osmond had swords, those of the faith militant, but banners? Only the small folk in King's Landing pledged true devotion, and that alone would not sway the lords of the realm. So he set in motion a campaign of letters, gilded with the high Septon seal, urging great houses to pledge themselves to the faith, to recall the Targaryen era when the church had been a guiding influence upon the crown. Though in truth, the Targaryens and the faith had often clashed, leading to the disbandment of the original faith militant. Osmond's approach was simple. He promised to rule through fairness and compassion, protecting the small folk from ravages of war, and ending the chaos that plagued Westeros. He invoked the righteousness of the Seven, painting a stark contrast between his holy rule and the savage conflicts that had scarred the realm. Days turned to weeks. The realm held its breath, uncertain whether war would ignite. Then news arrived of a skirmish on the Gold Road near the border with the Westerlands. A caravan carrying the faith's tithes from Lannisport had been attacked by armed men loyal to House Lannister, or so it was claimed. The chest of coin and half the faith militant escort disappeared. Survivors returned to King's Landing, wounded and furious. Sir Brian demanded an immediate march on Casterly Rock, but King Osmond refused to act rashly. Instead, he sent ravens to the Warden of the West, demanding restitution. Let the conflict, if it arose, appear to be started by the Lannisters, thus ensuring that the faith's cause remained righteous. The Lannisters, once proud and wealthy beyond measure, now found themselves diminished by debts from the wars of preceding generations. Lord Tybalt Lannister was a man whose pride still burned hot, though he had neither the gold nor the cunning of his ancestors. Standing in the main hall of Casterly Rock, he read the faith's demand with narrowed eyes. In his youth, he had been taught that the faith militant existed to serve the realm, not to rule it. He found the very notion of a high Septon upon the Iron Throne an insult to tradition. Yet he also understood the risk of an open breach with the faith. The small folk in the Westerlands would hardly rally to his banner if he were seen as an enemy of the Seven. With his advisors gathered, Lord Tybalt weighed his options. "They accuse us of attacking their caravan on the Gold Road," he said. "Can we prove otherwise?" A steward cleared his throat. "My lord, we know the border is teeming with desperate mercenaries. They might have flown Lannister banners just to cause trouble. Or perhaps they were truly in our pay," Lord Tybalt's uncle said, his voice cold. "We cannot be certain, but paying restitution sets a dangerous precedent. We are recognized in the realm as protectors, not outlaws to be ransomed." Lord Tybalt spat. "I will not be intimidated by self-righteous Septons. No matter how many peasants praise them, the great houses still rule the land. One does not kneel to a man who was a beggar in robes a year ago. Ben understand. His uncle's gaze flickered. He has the faith militant and the city behind him. We have swords and our house name. But if the realm's small folk are swayed to support him, we may find ourselves fighting not just men in steel, but entire villages, every hamlet from here to the capital, turning against us. And so we must tread carefully. Lord Tybalt paused. Send the High Septon's men a letter. Deny any knowledge of the attack on the tithes. Offer them an investigation. But do not pay a single dragon until we know the truth. We'll see if King Osmond is wise enough to parley. Menatrutter. And so the realm watched as the conflict between the faith's new king and the Westerlands simmered. Across the land, lords who detested the idea of a theocracy quietly rooted for Tybalt Lannister to hold firm. Others saw in King Osmond a chance to break free of the old cycles of bloodshed. If Osmond succeeded, the realm might finally know unity under the Seven. If he failed, the faith militant risked extinction, as it had faced centuries before. Within King's Landing, the faith militant intensified their patrols. Each day, King Osmond walked among the poor, distributing alms, offering blessings. His piety was genuine. None could deny that. Nor could they deny he was no common fool. Behind his mild tone lurked a cautious strategist. He established lines of communication with maesters throughout the realm, urging them to spread the faith's message of peace and humility. He even reached out to Dorne, praising their storied history of defiance and promising them fair treatment under the new order. He made sure each overture appealed to a sense of higher virtue, a rhetorical method that cornered potential foes into appearing ungodly if they spurned him. But the cracks began to show when a group of merchants complained about the confessor of tithes extorting more coin than ever before, all in the name of the faith. Pious or no, the realm still needed gold. Funding the stew kitchens, arming the faith militant, and rebuilding the great sept, damaged during the riots a decade prior, required a constant influx of coin. The confessor, in his zeal, had no tolerance for evasion. He declared excommunication on any man who withheld the demanded sum. That was enough to make most merchants pay, but resentment brewed. More than a few whispered that these were the same strong-arm tactics used by corrupt lords, only now carried out in the Seven's name. In their private quarters, a handful of Septons who had served under the old High Septon muttered darkly that Osmond's quest for piety had become entangled with ambition. True or not, the fact remained. The throne was a precarious seat, and men and women across King's Landing, from the ragged orphans who lined up for bread in the mornings, to the wealthy spice traders whose shipments were being tithed so heavily, wondered how long the new king's grace would last. One moonlit evening, King Osmond prayed alone before the statues of the Seven in the great CTT. Candles flickered, casting shadows on the marble floor. He knelt, pressing his hands together, lips moving silently. He prayed for guidance, for clarity in the face of the realm's looming troubles. The candles danced, illuminating his thin face. And as he prayed, it seemed as if the statues gazed upon him. Then came a whisper of footsteps. "Your Grace," came Sir Brian's voice. "A thousand pardons for interrupting, but a rider has arrived from the Westerlands. He bears a letter from Lord Tybalt Lannister." Osmond slowly rose, turning to face the knight. "The wait is over, then." Sir Brian inclined his head. "He denies involvement, suggests a joint investigation. He also insists no gold shall be paid until guilt is proven." Osmond studied the flickering candle. "He will not comply. Perhaps that is well. We shall see where his conscience leads him." His voice was calm, but a tension coiled beneath his measured words. "Summon the confessor of tithes and the rest of the council. Tonight we decide our response. Let us pray we choose rightly." "Yes, Your Grace." Sir Brian bowed and withdrew. Alone once more, Osmond gazed at the statue of the father, who held a sword of justice. He pressed a trembling hand against his breast. He had asked for this burden in the name of the Seven, and it was laid upon him now. To rule with true righteousness, to be both king and pontiff, he would need unwavering resolve. But in the back of his mind, A doubt flickered like a draft-blown flame. If he was indeed chosen by the Seven, would their design truly lead the realm to bloodshed yet again? Did devotion demand steel? And if so, how many innocents would die in the name of an ideal? When the meeting convened in what had once been the small council chamber, the holy men wore robes of white and gold, the faith star embroidered in patterns on their chests. Sir Brian, clad in plate etched with the same star, stood behind Osmond. The confessor of tithes wore an embroidered stole that nearly brushed the floor, heavy with precious metal threads. In the center of the table were letters from across the realm, some from minor lords pledging support, others expressing tepid neutrality, still others from bannermen of the crown's former line, uncertain whether to accept this new regime. "We cannot appear weak," said the confessor, his voice edged with fervor. "The Westerlands must atone, or we lose our claim to moral authority. Do we let brigands who strike at the faith go unpunished, simply because they wear the Lion of Lannister?" Then, a young Septon on the council, more scholarly than Militant, raised a hand. "But we have no proof, and we are the ones seizing a throne for ourselves. Must we not ensure that our every action is beyond reproach?" The confessor snorted. "Westerosi lords respect power, not only prayers. If we falter, they will sense weakness and tear us down. Remember, the realm's memory is long. The faith Militant once warred against the Targaryens themselves, and we lost. Now that we hold the throne, we cannot show any sign of fear." Sir Brian said, "The men who attacked our caravan may indeed have Lannister ties, or they could be Sellswords hoping to provoke a confrontation. A joint investigation might be wise, but only if Tybalt Lannister proves sincere. Otherwise, we risk being led into a trap." He turned to Osmond. "Your Grace, you know the hearts of men can be fickle. Should you march the faith Militant west, you might spark a realm-wide conflict. But if we don't act, we invite more attacks." Silence reigned. The distant sound of wind against the stone walls of the Red Keep was the only intruder. Finally, King Osmond spoke. "I will write to Lord Tybalt and accept his offer of a joint investigation. We will send a Septon of unimpeachable reputation, and a small escort led by a commander who can read men's faces. Let them see whether the Westerlands truly cooperates in good faith." His gaze swept the table. "We remain, above all, men of the Seven. Our cause is not to plunge the realm into war, but to show that we can rule justly. Remember, you are not the first shepherds to lead a flock toward a perilous valley. If we must wage war to defend the faith, we shall. But we will not be the ones to draw first blood." "Bah!" The confessor gave a grudging nod. Sir Brian inclined his head, impressed. Though many expected a theocratic king to be either timid or a fanatic, Osmond demonstrated a cunning sense of balance. Whether it would be enough to keep the realm from fracturing remained to be seen. In the weeks that followed, the Septon chosen to investigate arrived in Lannisport, flanked by a dozen devout knights. They met Lannister officers and scoured the scene of the ambush along the Gold Road. At first, progress seemed promising. They found evidence of Sellsword involvement, though the crest of House Lannister had indeed been used by the attackers. Lord Tybalt swore up and down it was a ruse aimed at tarnishing the name of the Lions. He invited the Septon and his knights to dine at Casterly Rock, offering every courtesy. Just as the Septon began to suspect an amicable resolution could be reached, a strange accident nearly cost him his life, a crumbling ledge in the rock's upper halls, which collapsed at precisely the moment he passed beneath it. A handful of watchers believed they saw a figure tampering with the supports, though they could not swear it. The Septon escaped with a shattered ankle. The Lannisters claimed innocence. The Faith's knights seethed. Under the watchful eyes of Lord Tybalt's men, the Septon and his escort withdrew to King's Landing. The entire realm braced for the aftermath. The Lannisters shrugged it off as a regrettable mishap. Doubt. But to King Osmond's men, it reeked of an attempted assassination, one that proved any alliance with Casterly Rock was built on rotting planks. After weeks of silence, a single raven arrived in the Red Keep, bearing Tybalt Lannister's final missive. He lamented the injury but refused blame. No gold will be sent until the realm can be assured the faith does not simply reach for every dragon in existence, the letter read, couched in polite courtesies, but rigid in tone. With that, the lines were drawn. Tybalt Lannister would not be cowed. In small, ominous steps, preparations for conflict began. The confessor of tithes pressed more vigorously for coin, doubling tithes in King's Landing and the Crown Lands. Sir Brian called the faith militant to muster outside the city walls, drilling them daily. King Osmond took to prayer with renewed fervor, often fasting long into the night. Yet in the mornings, he would emerge to sermonize in the great Septon, reminding the people that their faith would be tested and urging them not to succumb to fear. The faithful listened, rapt, trusting that the seven would guide their new king to victory or compromise as was divine will. All the while, the city's tensions deepened. The tavern keepers lamented the new restrictions. Wealthy courtiers struggled to hide their gambling dalliances, fearing the watchful eye of devout inspectors. Crime shifted from open violence to hidden conspiracies. The small folk found themselves conscripted in the name of the faith, though not into a formal army, rather as laborers, forced to build fortifications around the city or haul supplies for the militants' use. Some did so willingly, seeing it as a holy duty. Others grumbled but complied, for who would dare defy the king chosen by the seven? A wave of forcibly pious discipline washed over King's Landing. Men caught with prostitutes were flogged in the streets. Women rumored to practice the old ways of Essos were driven from their homes. The pilgrims who came to the great Sept to see the king's sermons found themselves carefully watched, questioned if they so much as murmured an irreverent word. The charitable side of Osmond's reign persisted, but the grip of religious law tightened. Each day, the city felt less free and more devout, willingly or not. And so the new king's vision began to reveal its double-edged nature. If the war with the Westerlands flared, the realm might soon be cast into chaos again, all under a banner of holiness. And what then would the small folk think of the man who once fed them bread and insisted that the seven taught mercy? Would they realize that a king must sometimes set mercy aside for security? Still, King Osmond's purpose remained unshaken. Each night, in the privacy of his royal bedchamber, a modest affair compared to previous monarchs, he read from the seven-pointed star, scrawling notes in the margins, seeking parallels between the holy text and his own predicament. Each morning he awoke, robed himself in white, and addressed his council with unwavering composure. Whispered rumors claimed he barely slept, that in the dark hours he was tormented by the weight of his responsibilities. Others said the seven themselves kept him awake, imparting secrets of destiny. Whatever the truth, Osmond marched forward, certain that if he faltered, the fragile dream of a righteous kingdom would collapse. Spring's end arrived with scattered rains, and the Westerlands teetered on the brink of open conflict with the faith. The Vale still hesitated, while the North kept a stony silence, its new lords reluctant to entangle themselves in southern politics. The Reach, battered by past wars, seemed uncommitted as well. Some lords there were devout, but the Tyrell seat had changed hands in ways that left the region wary of new crises. Dorne, ever proud, observed from a distance, exchanging letters with King Osmond, but making no promises. The Stormlands, ravaged by internal disputes over rightful succession, provided little clarity. In that volatile stew, the new king, High Septon Osmond, the Devout, prepared his kingdom for a trial of fire. Whether the faith would unify Westeros or shatter it further hung in the balance. Winter might still be coming, as the old saying went, but the Seven's thunder was already at the gates. And in the hushed corners of the Red Keep, where candlelight danced across stone walls, King Osmond prayed for forgiveness in advance, for all the sins he might soon be forced to commit in the name of righteous rule. And the confrontation with Lord Tybalt did not begin as a grand battle with banners and horns, but as a series of small feints and tests along the borders of the Westerlands. A faith militant patrol, escorting a caravan of grain from the Riverlands, vanished near an ancient ruin. Smoke rose from a hamlet a few leagues west. When riders were sent to investigate, they found the burnt remains of huts, charred bodies strewn in the wreckage, and no sign of an attacking force, only the imprint of lion-clawed boot heels in the mud, fresh enough that the smell of smoke still clung to the broken timbers. Sir Brian seethed at the news, though some suspected the attackers might be bandits impersonating Lannisters. Regardless, the narrative that arrived in King's Landing was stark. The Lannisters had burnt faithful subjects alive. The confessor of tithes pressed King Osmond to issue a condemnation. The royal Septons wrote fiery declarations, painting Tybalt as the greatest sinner in the realm. King Osmond, whether spurred by genuine conviction or political necessity, relented to the calls for retribution. He proclaimed that the fatherless must be protected, that the seven commanded them to remove the lion who devours the lambs. Shortly thereafter, a raven brought word that Lord Tybalt had raised his banners in the Westerlands. Though he did not formally declare war on the faith, he called his bannermen to defend against religious tyranny. Tensions flared. Skirmishes multiplied along the Gold Road. Refugees began trickling into the Crownlands, their stories fueling righteous anger among the devout. Finally, with a heavy heart, King Osmond rose before the great Seps congregation and announced the time had come. The faithful would march. The bells tolled, and though the day was bright, a sense of foreboding weighed on every ear that heard them. By the thousands, men of the faith militant donned steel and leather, bearing the seven-pointed star upon their chests, traveling north and west to meet the lines of the Lannister host. They were not as numerous as a united royal army in days past, but every man believed in the cause. Zeal can be a potent shield, and an even sharper sword. Atop a horse as white as prayer cloth, King Osmond watched the columns of soldiers file out of King's Landing. He did not stand in shining armor. He wore a simple breastplate bearing the star, robes trailing behind him. Sir Brian was at his side, resplendent in polished plate, eyes scanning for any sign of threat. The city's folk lined the streets, chanting prayers. Some cheered, convinced their holy king would return victorious. Others stared in silence, uncertain whether they watched the birth of a holy age or the beginning of catastrophe. Osmond did not yet ride out with the main host. He remained in the capital, convinced that a king should not fling himself onto the field without first tending to the realm's defenses. Yet a portion of him longed to be among his zealous men. If they bled for him, should he not stand with them? He prayed for guidance, repeatedly, but no divine voice answered. Only the silent push of events drew him forward. In distant corners of Westeros, other lords conferred anxiously. Should the faith prove victorious against the Lannisters, a theocratic monarchy would become more than a passing upheaval. It would stand as a terrifying new power in the land. The unscrupulous whispered that House Lannister, with its dwindling gold, might still bribe a few unscrupulous sellsword companies from across the narrow sea, or approach the Iron Bank, which seldom cared for the moral justifications of war, only for the returns on its investments. Dark plots began to swirl. If the faith marched toward the Westerlands, might the Iron Islands take advantage to raid the coasts? Would Dorne seize the moment to press old grievances? Would the Vale pick a side to ensure its own benefit? Meanwhile, in King's Landing, the newly anointed courtiers who served King Osmond discovered that the daily tasks of governance grew no lighter in wartime. Food had to be rationed. The city watch, those who remained, had to be integrated under the faith militants' command. Letters arrived constantly from the front lines, full of pleas for reinforcements or resources, but the faith's treasury was draining. Even as the devout rallied to the cause, steel had to be purchased, wagons built, roads maintained. Late one evening, King Osmond stood on a balcony, overlooking Blackwater Bay. The moon cast a pale glow across the water, where the outlines of a few war galleys drifted under the faith's banner. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see a hooded figure approach. Septa Winifred, an older woman known for her wise counsel. "Your Grace," she said softly, "I bring news from the front." Osmond's breath caught. "Tell me," he said, bracing himself. "There has been a battle near Ashmark. Our forces under Sir Brian engaged a Lannister vanguard. The fight was brief, but bloody. Word says the faith militant fought with courage, But the Lannisters are no mere rabble. They have the discipline of many generations. Casualties are high on both sides. Damn. Pain flickered in his eyes. And Sir Brian? Wounded, but alive. He writes that he needs more men, especially mounted knights. The Lannisters hold Ashmark's castle and show no sign of yielding. Osmond closed his eyes, pressing trembling fingers to his temple. I must go to them, he said at last, voice laden with regret. I cannot pray in safety while our knights fall. Septa Winifred inclined her head. If you ride to war, your grace, you will risk your life. Should you fall, the realm will be plunged into chaos. Chaos may already be upon us, he murmured. But I have made my choice. The realm must see that I do not shrink from the burdens I place upon them. Summon the confessor of tithes. He must remain here to secure the city and keep the treasury functioning. I will gather a contingent of faithful knights and ride west at dawn. She nodded and slipped back into the shadows. When morning came, the city awoke to find that King Osmond had departed, a retinue of white-robed faith knights trailing after him. The watchers on the city walls stared at his diminished entourage. No more than 300 rode with the king. His move seemed bold, almost reckless. Yet a fervent hush fell among the people. Some wept openly, calling him the bravest king in memory. Others gritted their teeth, fearing that if the war went ill, the faith's power would collapse, leaving them exposed once again to a realm of uncertain lords. On the roads, Osmond traveled swiftly. His band moved lightly, avoiding any show of pomp. They offered blessings in hamlets along the way, distributing food from their wagons. Peasants knelt in the dirt to touch the hem of the king's robe. He had never before ventured so far from King's Landing since his coronation, and the sight of the devastation wrought by years of strife weighed heavily upon him. Fields unplowed, houses abandoned, the skeleton of once thriving villages. Everywhere he saw land thirsting for peace. As they drew nearer to Ashmark, the signs of war thickened. Burned farms, half-buried bodies in ditches, crows circling overhead. The stench of death wafted on the wind. Finally, King Osmond's party spotted the faith militant encampment, its tents a sea of white and starry banners. When he arrived, the soldiers fell silent. Knights bowed. Scavenging crows flapped away from the latrines, startled by the sudden wave of activity. Osmond dismounted before Sir Brian's command tent, dust coating his robe's hem. The holy protector emerged, limping on a bandaged thigh, his face tight with pain and resolve. Your Grace, Sir Brian said, and knelt. You should not have come. Osmond offered him a hand up. My friend, I should have come sooner. You have served valiantly. Sir Brian's eyes flickered with gratitude. There is no greater glory than to fight in the Seven's name. They entered the tent. Inside, a map of the Westerlands lay spread across a makeshift table. Rivulets of dried blood stained the edges, reminders that men had been carried in here, wounded and dying to share what they knew of the fighting. Oshric the scout captain, a lean man with a crooked nose, hovered over the map, pointing to scribbled notes. House Lannister's forces hold Ashmark itself, Oshric explained. We clashed with them on the field outside the town. We inflicted serious losses, but they forced a retreat. Their cavalry is better equipped than ours, and they have the advantage of the castle. We're currently holding the high ground east of the river, but supplies run thin. Soon we'll lose the capacity to hold out if they press us. Osmond scanned the map. Is Lord Tybalt here in person? Sir Brian nodded. Reports say he is, yes. He commands from within Ashmark's walls. Osmond's face settled into grim determination. We cannot simply starve them out. Winter's not yet arrived, but the realm's storehouses are spent from too many wars. A protracted siege will only bring ruin to the small folk. We must find a way to show Tybalt the futility of his stand, or else break him swiftly. A hush settled. The men present grasped the meaning. If Lord Tybalt refused to yield, a direct assault might be the only option. That would be a bloody affair. It was then that a messenger arrived, a panting young squire. He carried a piece of cloth emblazoned with the golden lion. a sign that someone from the opposing side had approached under a flag of parley. "Sir, my lords," he stammered, "a Lannister herald stands at the edge of camp, requesting an audience." Osmond exchanged a glance with Sir Brian. "Show me," the king said. Outside, near a ring of pikes manned by Faith militant sentries, a tall herald wearing red and gold approached, helmet cradled in the crook of his arm. He had close-cropped blonde hair and wary blue eyes. His left hand trembled a bit, a sign of nerves or an old injury. He bowed stiffly. "I come on behalf of Lord Tybalt Lannister," he announced. "He suggests a meeting at a neutral site to discuss terms." King Osmond regarded him calmly. "Terms of what? A cessation of hostilities, perhaps, or an agreement to avoid further bloodshed. Will you attend, your grace? He invites you to a clearing 2 leagues south of Ashmark, near the old oak with the broken trunk." Sir Brian's face darkened with suspicion. "You expect the king to walk into a trap? We demand better security than some clearing." The herald did not flinch. "Lord Tybalt proposes each side bring no more than 10 men. He swears on his house honor that no harm shall come to you under the banner of truce." "How comforting," Sir Brian muttered. "And if we are betrayed?" King Osmond raised a hand for silence. "We will come," he said, surprising the men around him. "At midday tomorrow. Let your lord prepare his mind and his heart." The herald bowed, relief flickering in his eyes, and departed. When he was gone, Sir Brian turned to Osmond. "Your grace, this is madness. He tried to kill our Septon investigator at Casterly Rock, and has repeatedly attacked our supply caravans. We must not trust him." "Then so?" Osmond's gaze hardened. "I do not trust him," he replied. "But neither can I cling to war if there is a chance to spare lives. We will take precautions. Yet if he sincerely offers peace, I must hear him out. I did not take the throne to butcher every man who opposes me. If we can end this with words, we shall." That night, the Faith camp was restless. Men cleaned weapons, prayed over them. Rumors spread of the king's courage or foolhardiness. Some feared that Tybalt meant to seize the king and force the Faith militant to surrender. Others hoped a parley might lead to an end of bloodshed. King Osmond spent the evening in his tent, reading quietly from the 7-pointed star by lamplight. In the distance, he heard the faint moans of the wounded, the occasional snort of horses. War was an unholy cacophony, and it weighed on his soul. Morning came, bleak skies threatening rain. Osmond gathered 10 knights. Sir Brian insisted on being one of them, despite his wound, and they rode south from camp. Over hills battered by countless footsteps, they passed the bones of an old orchard, the trees bare and twisted from neglect. The path led them to the clearing near the oak with the broken trunk, just as promised. Lord Tybalt was already there, accompanied by men in red cloaks. Even at a distance, Osmond recognized Tybalt by his proud stance and the gleam of gold in his armor. The 2 parties halted a stone's throw apart. A hush lay over the clearing. Birds did not sing, even the wind seemed subdued. At last, King Osmond and Lord Tybalt dismounted, each flanked by 2 knights, and met in the middle. Their men eyed one another tensely, hands near sword hilts. Lord Tybalt inclined his head, not quite a bow. "Your Holiness," he said. His tone carried a hint of sarcasm. "Lord Tybalt," Osmond replied, ignoring the barb. "You asked for this parley. I come in the spirit of the 7. Tybalt studied him. This slender man in a plain steel breastplate and white robe. A circlet crown on his brow inscribed with the star. He seemed less imposing than Tybalt had imagined, but an undercurrent of authority radiated from his calm features. Tybalt set his jaw. "I do not relish war. Many of my men have died, as have yours. My father always said, if you must fight, do so quickly, then talk. We have fought. Now we talk." Osmond nodded. "Then speak your terms. Why do you resist our rightful claim?" Tybalt's nostrils flared. "Because you, your Holiness, were never anointed to rule in the sense that my ancestors, or any of the great houses were. The faith is meant to guide men's souls, not command their swords. This crossing of lines is unnatural. Still, I do not wish to see the realm bled dry yet again. I would consider withdrawing if you cede certain powers back to the nobility, and if you reduce these tithes which choke our trade. Then, Osman's voice softened. The realm has starved under the old system of warring lords. This new order is meant to protect all, from highborn to small folk. Our tithes sustain the poor as well as our cause. We cannot abandon them. Tybalt snorted. How convenient. You tax us for the poor while you build up your armies. My father faced a similar hypocrisy. One day, the lords were free. The next, we discover the faith hoards coin for its own ends. I do not trust a man who claims the ear of the gods while ignoring the laws of men. Nenarwan. Sir Brian bristled, hand drifting toward his sword, but Osman gave a subtle gesture to stay him. I hear your misgivings, the king said. But I ask you, if you truly desire peace, what arrangement would let us both uphold our convictions without more bloodshed? Tybalt was silent for a moment. He glanced toward his knights. Then he drew a breath, seeming to weigh what he'd say next. Renounce your crown and remain High Septon. Let the realm choose a new king from among the great houses, or hold a council if you like. The faith can remain an influential power, but not the ruling one. Then I promise we will cease hostilities. Sir Brian barked a harsh laugh. He would have you hand over the throne you bled to claim. Osmond held up a hand again, his gaze fixed on Tybalt. You ask me to betray the small folk who have placed their trust in me. They starved and suffered under your great house's wars? Why should we revert to that? So lords can settle their feuds at the expense of the powerless? No, Lord Tybalt. My conscience won't allow it. Then so. Tybalt's face hardened. Then we are at an impasse. A flicker of sorrow passed over Osmond's features. If you insist on a return to the old ways, we cannot oblige. What if we negotiated a seat for House Lannister on a newly formed council, ensuring your voice in the realm's governance? One seat among the devout, bridging church and nobility. Tybalt tensed. And remain subservient to you? He let out a disdainful scoff. No, Dot. The lion bows to no robed pretender. Nadim. For a moment, neither man spoke. The tension in the clearing crackled like storm-charged air. Distant thunder murmured, as if the sky itself disapproved. Then Lord Tybalt stepped back, lifting his chin. Very well, if that is your answer, I see no choice but to continue this war to protect our sovereignty. Perhaps you believe the Seven stand with you, but the laws of steel remain. Let us see if prayer protects you from the lion's jaws. He turned on his heel, cloak swirling behind him, and strode back to his mount. His knights followed, glaring at the faith's entourage. King Osmond stood unmoving, eyes closed as if in silent prayer. Then, with measured steps, he returned to his own horse, the men around him bristling at the Lannister insult. As they rode back toward camp, the sky unleashed a light drizzle, baptizing them in chill drops of water. Sir Brian drew alongside his king, voice low with concern. I fear we have no recourse but to force him down. Osmond nodded, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. Yes, he said, sorrow lacing the word. War is upon us, though it grieves me deeply. Let us prepare for battle. Da. And so ended the ill-fated parley. The next dawn the horns of war sounded across the fields near Ashmark. The faith militant readied for an assault, determined to unseat Lord Tybalt or break his host. From atop the walls of Ashmark, Lannister archers gazed out over the approaching lines, their lion banners flapping in a stiff wind. The stage was set for a confrontation that would echo across Westeros. At stake was not just a crown, but the question of who should wield power in the realm. A man anointed by the Seven, or the ancient lines of noble blood. King Osmond, upon his white horse, lifted his gaze to the swirling clouds. The time for negotiation had passed. He offered a final prayer that in the name of the Seven, the good of the people might yet prevail. Then he signaled the advance, and the thunder of hooves drowned the quiet hush that had lingered in the early morning air. The faith militant, brandishing star-emblazoned shields and singing hymns, began their march, into blood, into glory, and perhaps into the realm's darkest hour.